The milk was already warm when Avera lifted the cup from the counter. She stood there a moment longer than usual, watching the surface tremble as she stirred in the supplement she had measured earlier. It wasn't dangerous. She had checked, read, confirmed. Enough to deepen sleep. Enough to quiet resistance. People often misunderstood caution as cruelty, but Avera knew the difference. Care was intentional. Caven drank it without suspicion, thanking her the way he always did. "You spoil me," he said, smiling. She smiled back. "Go to bed." Later, when his breathing settled into a steady rhythm, she reached for his phone. The screen unlocked easily. The image appeared without searching. A woman's bare back. A butterfly resting just below the shoulder. Avera didn't gasp. She simply nodded, as though something long unanswered had finally spoken. The following morning unfolded with practiced normalcy. Caven left for work after breakfast, his kiss landing lightly on Avera's cheek, familiar enough to feel rehearsed. She watched him go without standing at the door the way she used to. Some habits fade quietly once attention shifts elsewhere. By early afternoon, she was already at his office building. She found Solène in the hallway near the elevators, arms full of files, expression composed. The woman moved with confidence, the kind that didn't ask for permission. Avera timed it carefully. One step too close. One slight turn. The coffee spilled cleanly. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Avera said immediately, her voice steady, sincere. "That was careless of me." Solène glanced down at the spreading stain on her blouse and then back up. "It's fine," she replied, though her tone carried disappointment. "No, it's not," Avera insisted. "Please, let me replace it. I'd feel awful otherwise." After a brief pause, Solène nodded. "All right, thank you." At the mall, Avera guided the conversation easily, keeping things light. She listened more than she spoke, noting how Solène laughed, how she described Caven as thoughtful, attentive, generous. None of it sounded accidental. "Try this one," Avera suggested, handing her a dress with an open back. "It suits your frame." Solène hesitated, then smiled. "You have good taste." When she stepped out of the fitting room, Avera's eyes went straight to her back. Smooth, unmarked. Avera felt the briefest flicker of doubt, then it passed. By evening, Avera had already decided what the next step would be, not out of anger, but out of discipline. She understood something most people learn too late. Assumptions felt convincing until they were tested. Certainty required structure. The banquet invitation arrived that afternoon, formal and expected. Caven mentioned it casually over dinner, as though it carried no weight beyond his schedule. "It's just work," he said. "I'll probably be late." "I know," Avera replied, clearing the table. "You should go." He paused. "Are you sure?" She looked at him then. Calm, present. Of course, earlier that day, long before the sun began to set, Avera had been at the hotel, neutral uniform, hair tucked away, head down. No one questioned her presence. People rarely noticed those who appeared to belong. Inside the private suite, she worked carefully. The camera was small, placed high enough to see the room clearly without invading it. She tested the angle once, adjusted it, and then left without a trace. This wasn't about watching intimacy. It was about observing intention. Education often began there, understanding that choices revealed more than excuses ever could. That evening, dressed simply, Avera stood near the edge of the banquet hall. She didn't join the crowd. She watched. Caven arrived beside Solène. They didn't touch, but distance between them had softened. Conversation stayed close, familiar. A waiter approached Avera quietly. She handed him a key card, her voice low and composed. "This is a complimentary room," she said. "Please deliver it to Mr. Caven." The waiter nodded and walked away. Avera watched as the card changed hands. She saw Caven hesitate. She saw Solène's brief smile. Neither of them asked why. That answer was enough. Avera didn't follow them. She didn't need to. Some moments revealed themselves without pursuit. She left the banquet hall quietly, blending back into the steady movement of guests and staff. By the time she reached home, the night had settled into stillness. She changed into something comfortable, washed her hands, and sat at the edge of the bed. Waiting had become familiar to her, but this time it felt different. It felt deliberate. When she opened the live feed later, she did so without urgency. The room came into view clearly. Khyven and Solen entered with ease, like people who had already agreed on what the moment meant. They laughed softly. He loosened his jacket. She moved closer. No one seemed uncertain. "You didn't have to accept the room," Solen said lightly. Khyven smiled. "I wanted to talk somewhere quiet." They sat near each other, shoulders almost touching. Conversation leaned inward, private, comfortable. It was the comfort that unsettled Avera most. Comfort came from repetition, from familiarity built over time. They never crossed a physical boundary, not that night. But education had taught Avera something long before this moment. Intent mattered. Decisions were not defined only by action, but by willingness, by what someone allowed themselves to consider acceptable. She closed the feed after a few minutes. There was nothing more to learn. Later, near dawn, Khyven returned home. His movements were careful. He showered longer than usual, as though time itself could be rinsed away. When he slipped into bed beside her, his arm rested near hers, uncertain. Avera stayed still. Silence, she knew, could be more revealing than confrontation. Morning arrived without ceremony. Khyven moved through the kitchen as though nothing had shifted, pouring coffee, checking his phone, glancing at the clock. He kissed Avera's forehead before leaving, the gesture careful, almost studied. "I'll call you later," he said. She nodded. Drive safely. Only after the door closed did Avera allow herself to sit down. The truth had not started with the hotel room. It had begun weeks earlier, on their 4th wedding anniversary, when Solen had spoken to Khyven with a familiarity that ignored presence and position. It had continued with the silk scarf, soft, expensive, matching the receipt folded inside his coat pocket. And it had grown louder as Khyven changed in ways that were easy to explain and impossible to ignore. Gentler words, shorter conversations, a man physically present and quietly elsewhere. Education had taught Avera something simple and enduring. Patterns mattered more than promises. Behavior, repeated and protected, revealed intention. She hadn't set a trap out of jealousy. She had set it out of respect, for herself and for truth. This was the moment she realized her husband hadn't slipped. He had chosen, and once a choice was seen clearly, it could never be unseen. If you're drawn to stories that explore truth, boundaries, and the quiet strength it takes to listen to yourself, welcome to Midnight Story Vault. Stay with us. After Khyven left that morning, Avera stayed seated at the kitchen table longer than necessary. The chair across from her was still warm. That detail mattered to her more than grand gestures ever had. Their love had never been loud. From the beginning, it had been built on repetition, the kind people mistook for boredom because it didn't ask to be admired. Khyven used to wake before her, always quietly, as if noise itself might disturb what they were building. She would find coffee waiting, the cup placed on the same corner of the counter every morning. "You're predictable," she once teased him, smiling. He looked up from the stove. "I prefer dependable." That word stayed with her. Their evenings followed patterns too. Dinner at home, more often than not. Conversations about ordinary things. Work, errands, plans that didn't need urgency. When silence arrived, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Avera believed love showed itself in what people did when no one was watching. Research she once read confirmed what experience had already taught her. Stability wasn't the absence of affection, but the presence of reliability. Consistency built safety, and safety allowed connection to deepen without performance. That was the kind of love she had trusted, the kind she thought could not disappear without warning. Their marriage had its own language, one that didn't rely on explanation. Avera knew Khyven's moods by the way he set his keys down. He knew hers by how slowly she moved through the house. They rarely asked each other what was wrong. They adjusted instead. Some nights, they sat on opposite ends of the couch, reading separate books, feet touching lightly. Other nights, Khyven would glance over and say, Long day? She would nod. Long enough. That was enough for him to reach for her hand. No questions. No fixing. These rhythms made Avera feel secure. Life felt manageable when love didn't demand constant proof. She believed that when two people learned each other deeply, effort became quieter, not absent. It lived in awareness, in noticing. Studies she once came across spoke about emotional attunement, how partners who understood each other's patterns communicated more through behavior than words. Avera hadn't needed the research to know it was true. She lived it. That was why the shift unsettled her later. When the rhythms faltered, it wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. And subtle changes were the hardest to explain, especially when your entire relationship had been built on what didn't need to be said. Avera had never been drawn to dramatic love. She found comfort in what endured rather than what impressed. While others spoke of passion as something that had to be chased, she believed it was something that settled, the way calm water deepened with time. Cavan understood that about her. "You don't need surprises," he once said, folding laundry beside her. "You need continuity." She smiled. "I need truth." They built their life accordingly. Plans were made carefully. Promises were kept quietly. Their marriage wasn't marked by public displays or constant excitement, but by shared responsibility and mutual respect. Avera believed that spectacle often distracted from substance. Stability, on the other hand, required daily commitment. Psychologists often noted that long-term bonds thrived not on intensity, but on predictability paired with trust. Avera had embraced that idea fully. It aligned with her experience, reinforced her belief that love didn't vanish simply because attention wandered elsewhere for a moment. That belief was what made the change so painful later. When stability fractures, it doesn't shatter loudly. It shifts, and once that shift is felt, everything that once felt safe begins to ask questions it never had before. What she stood to lose wasn't excitement, it was certainty. The first change Avera noticed wasn't distance. It was tenderness. Cavan began doing more, opening doors, offering to help with tasks she had managed alone for years, asking if she was tired even when she wasn't. His voice softened, as though every word had been rehearsed before leaving his mouth. "You okay?" he asked one evening, brushing past her in the kitchen. "You seem quiet." "I'm fine," she replied. "Just thinking." He nodded too quickly. "Let me know if you need anything." The attention should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt deliberate, like kindness with an agenda. Avera understood that genuine care flowed naturally, while performative care arrived suddenly, often when someone was compensating for something unspoken. She didn't question him. She didn't pull away. She simply noticed. People often believed more affection meant more love, but Avera knew emotional behavior mattered most when it aligned with presence, not when it appeared to replace it. As Cavan's gentleness increased, his presence thinned. He was still home on time, still sat across from her at dinner, still nodded when she spoke. But his attention no longer stayed where his body was. His eyes drifted. His responses arrived late, as though he had been called back from somewhere distant. "You didn't hear what I said," Avera noted one night, not accusing, just observing. He looked up quickly. "Sorry. Say it again." She repeated herself, watching him carefully. He listened this time, but something felt forced, like a correction instead of connection. They spent more moments together without sharing them. Silence used to feel restful between them. Now it felt occupied by thoughts she wasn't part of. Avera remembered reading once that emotional absence often preceded physical withdrawal. People could remain in place while quietly relocating their attention elsewhere. She didn't ask where his mind was going. She understood that awareness came before questions, and questions asked too early often invited performances instead of truth. The phone became an extension of Cavan's hand. It followed him from room to room, screen angled away, always within reach. When messages arrived, he glanced down quickly, thumb moving before Avera could read his expression. He didn't hide it openly. He simply managed it carefully. "Work again?" she asked once, lightly. "Always," he replied, setting the phone face down on the table. That detail stayed with her. He hadn't needed to place it that way before. Avera understood that secrecy wasn't always dramatic. Often, it showed up in small adjustments meant to avoid attention. At night, the device rested beneath his pillow or on the floor beside the bed. Notifications were silenced. Patterns changed. And patterns, she knew, were rarely accidental. Behavioral studies often pointed out that when communication habits shifted suddenly, it signaled a reallocation of emotional energy. Avera didn't label it betrayal yet. She simply acknowledged that something in their shared space was no longer shared. Their conversations didn't disappear. They simply ended sooner. Avera would begin a thought, and Khyven would respond with something brief, polite, complete enough to close the exchange. There were no arguments, no impatience, just an efficiency that hadn't been there before. "How was your meeting?" she asked one evening. "Fine," he said. "Long." She waited, expecting more. None came. "Anything interesting?" she added. He shrugged lightly. Same as usual. What used to unfold into shared reflection now stopped at summary. Avera noticed how stories no longer circled back to her, how curiosity no longer lingered. Communication, she knew, wasn't measured by how often people spoke, but by how willing they were to stay in the exchange. Research often noted that emotional withdrawal revealed itself first in reduced dialogue. People conserved words when they were investing them elsewhere. Avera didn't confront him. She let the pattern complete itself, understanding that awareness was the first form of protection. The anniversary gathering had been Khyven's idea. Small, he said. Familiar faces. Nothing elaborate. Avera agreed easily. After weeks of shortened conversations and drifting attention, the simplicity felt reassuring. Their home filled slowly with polite voices and soft laughter. Glasses clinked. Compliments were exchanged. Khyven moved easily among the guests, confident, relaxed in a way Avera hadn't seen in some time. That was when Solène arrived. She didn't announce herself. She entered quietly, greeting Avera with a calm smile, posture straight, eyes attentive without being invasive. Her presence was measured, controlled, as though she understood exactly how much space to take. "Happy anniversary," Solène said warmly. "Your home is lovely." "Thank you," Avera replied. "Please, make yourself comfortable." Solène did just that. She spoke carefully, listened closely, laughed softly. When Khyven joined her in conversation, her attention narrowed, not obvious, not hurried, but focused in a way that lingered longer than courtesy required. Avera noticed how Solène never interrupted, never leaned too far, never crossed an obvious line. It was restraint that made her noticeable. People often believed attention had to be loud to matter. Avera knew better. Sustained focus, offered selectively, was often far more powerful. As the evening settled, Avera noticed how Solène remained near Khyven without appearing to follow him. Wherever he stood, she seemed to arrive moments later, close enough that their conversations stayed contained between them. "Do you work together often?" Solène asked him, her voice low. "Most days," Khyven replied easily. "She's efficient, keeps things moving." She smiled at that. "I've noticed." Avera watched from across the room, refilling glasses, adjusting plates, doing what hosts did. Khyven didn't step away. He didn't widen the space between them. When Solène leaned in slightly to speak, he stayed where he was, nodding, engaged. Someone else joined the group briefly, and Solène shifted just enough to remain beside him. Khyven allowed it, never once redirecting the conversation outward, never acknowledging the intimacy of the proximity. Avera felt the change then, not as pain, but as clarity. Social psychology often explained that boundaries were not only declared, but demonstrated. What people tolerated communicated more than what they said aloud. Khyven's silence wasn't neutral. It was permission. At some point in the evening, Avera stopped moving through the room automatically. The plates were cleared, the drinks were refreshed, laughter rose and fell around her. Yet something inside her had gone still. She noticed everything now. The way Khyven's posture softened when Solène spoke. The way his attention stayed anchored even when others addressed him. the ease with which the space between them remained unclaimed, as though it belonged there. "You're quiet tonight," Cavan said later, brushing past her in the kitchen. "I'm enjoying listening," she replied. He smiled, distracted, and returned to the guests. By the time the evening ended and the door closed behind the last visitor, Avera felt composed, not shaken. Awareness had replaced assumption. She moved through the quiet house with purpose, changing into sleepwear, turning off lights. In bed, Cavan fell asleep quickly, his breathing even, untroubled. Avera lay awake beside him, staring into the dark, understanding something important. Intuition rarely shouted. It gathered evidence patiently, waiting for the moment when denial could no longer speak louder than observation. That was the night her attention shifted permanently, from maintaining appearances to protecting herself. After the anniversary night, Avera stopped trying to explain things away. She didn't accuse. She didn't question. She paid attention. The receipt appeared first. She found it by accident while folding Cavan's coat, the paper smooth and neatly folded, tucked into an inner pocket. A silk scarf. Expensive, delicate, not something she owned. When Cavan walked in, she held it up lightly. "You dropped this." He glanced at it for half a second too long. "Oh, right. Work thing." She nodded. "I figured." She placed it back where she found it, watching his shoulders relax once the moment passed. The scarf came next. Days later, Solène wore it into the office, draped loosely around her neck as though it belonged there. Avera recognized it immediately. The color, the texture. Memory connected the dots before logic tried to interrupt. Then, there were the changes in Cavan's voice. When Solène's name surfaced in conversation, his tone softened, careful, almost protective. "She's good at what she does," he said once, quickly. "Very reliable." Reliable. The word echoed, and the hours stretched longer. Meetings ran late. Messages arrived earlier in the morning and stopped abruptly when Avera entered the room. "You're working a lot," she said one evening. "Just a busy season," he replied. Reasonable. Polished. Avera accepted the explanation aloud while storing the pattern quietly. Psychology often showed that single details could mislead, but repetition created clarity. She wasn't collecting proof to accuse. She was allowing information to present itself fully, without interference. Avera understood something that wasn't instinctive to everyone. Silence, when chosen deliberately, could be more revealing than questions. After the anniversary night and the accumulation of details, she didn't feel the urge to confront Cavan. Confrontation, she knew, often rushed people into defense before truth had time to surface. One evening, as Cavan prepared to leave again, she spoke only enough to observe. "You'll be late?" she asked. He adjusted his jacket. "Probably. Another meeting?" "Yes." She nodded, offering no follow-up. The absence of challenge allowed his explanation to remain untested, unshaped by pressure. She watched how easily he filled the space with just enough information to feel complete. People often believed that asking direct questions produced honest answers. Avera had learned otherwise. When suspicion was voiced too early, it gave others time to refine their stories, smooth inconsistencies, and rehearse sincerity. Silence, on the other hand, let patterns develop naturally. Cavan noticed her quiet. "You've been distant," he said one night. "I've just been listening," she replied. That answer unsettled him more than accusation ever could have. Behavioral research often emphasized that individuals revealed more when they believed they were not being evaluated. Avera wasn't withdrawing out of fear. She was allowing behavior to speak without interruption. Her restraint wasn't passivity, it was discipline. She wasn't avoiding truth. She was creating space for it to arrive intact. And once truth arrived fully formed, it would no longer depend on explanations to be understood. That night didn't arrive suddenly. It arrived after patience had done its work. Avera prepared the milk the way she always did, warming it slowly, stirring until the heat settled evenly. Her movements were steady, almost gentle. She measured the supplement carefully, checking the amount once more before adding it. Not out of fear, but out of responsibility. Control mattered. Precision mattered. Cavan watched her from the doorway. "You're thoughtful tonight," he said lightly. She glanced up. "Just tired." He smiled and took the cup from her hands. "I appreciate you." She nodded. "Drink it before it cools." Later, when the lights were off and his breathing deepened beside her, Avera didn't rush. She waited, listening until sleep claimed him fully. There was no pounding heart, no trembling hands. This wasn't impulse. It was intention shaped by restraint. She understood something many people overlooked. Clarity often required calm conditions. Decisions made in emotional heat blurred judgment. Those made in stillness tended to hold. When she reached for his phone, it wasn't with desperation. It was with readiness. She wasn't searching for something to react to. She was allowing information to confirm what awareness had already assembled. Prepared minds, she knew, absorbed truth without collapsing under it. When Avera unlocked the phone, she didn't brace herself. She didn't whisper prayers or prepare excuses for what she might see. Her face remained calm, her breathing even, as though she were opening a familiar book to a page she had already read in her mind. The screen lit the room faintly. Messages, photos, recent activity. She didn't scroll frantically. She didn't rush. Emotional restraint, she understood, wasn't about lacking feeling. It was about managing it. Strong reactions often came from surprise. Avera wasn't surprised. She had been listening for weeks. Cavan shifted slightly in his sleep. She paused, then continued, careful not to wake him. "If I'm wrong," she thought briefly, "this ends here." That thought grounded her. It reminded her that restraint protected not only her dignity, but fairness. She wasn't looking to punish. She was looking to confirm. Studies in emotional regulation often showed that people who slowed themselves during difficult discoveries processed outcomes more clearly and made better decisions afterward. Avera felt that truth settle into her body as she navigated the screen without panic. When the image finally appeared, her reaction didn't arrive as shock. It arrived as clarity. Her hands didn't shake. Her expression didn't change. And in that stillness she understood something quietly important. Composure didn't mean she wasn't hurt. It meant she was choosing not to let pain dictate her next move. The photo stayed on the screen longer than it needed to. A woman's back, bare and relaxed, turned slightly as though she trusted whoever stood behind the camera. A small butterfly rested just beneath her shoulder, delicate, intentional. The framing wasn't hurried. It wasn't stolen. It had been offered. Avera studied it carefully, not with jealousy but with analysis. "This wasn't an accident," she said softly, barely louder than breath. The image didn't speak of desire alone. It spoke of access, of comfort, of a moment someone had allowed to exist without fear of consequence. Passion was impulsive. This was permission. She thought of the evenings Cavan had come home late, still composed, of the gentle tone he used when speaking Solen's name, of how easily he had accepted explanations that required silence to survive. Betrayal, Avera realized, didn't begin when boundaries were crossed. It began when they were no longer defended. She locked the phone and placed it back exactly where she had found it. Precision mattered. Fairness mattered. She lay down beside him, staring into the dark, allowing the weight of understanding to settle fully before sleep. Behavioral studies often noted that meaning mattered more than evidence. Evidence showed what happened. Meaning explained why it was allowed. And once meaning was clear, denial lost its power entirely. The morning after Avera returned Cavan's phone to its place, she went to his workplace without announcing herself, not to confront, not to accuse, just to see what reality looked like outside the quiet of their bedroom. The building felt ordinary, busy without urgency. She signed in, nodded politely, and waited near the reception area as employees moved past her in practiced rhythm. Then Solen appeared. She was dressed simply that day, her hair pulled back, posture composed. Around her neck rested a silk scarf, loosely tied, its color unmistakable. Avera recognized it instantly, the texture, the shade. Memory confirmed what denial might have challenged. Solen noticed her and smiled. "Avera, right? Cavan mentioned you." "He did?" Avera replied, returning the smile. Yes. He speaks highly of you. That's kind of him, Avera said evenly. They stood there for a moment, exchanging pleasantries. Solène spoke with ease, her tone warm but contained. As she turned slightly to retrieve a file from the desk, Avera's eyes followed the line of her back. Bare skin, unmarked, no butterfly. For the briefest moment, doubt surfaced. Not panic, not fear, just a pause. Did you need something? Solène asked. No, Avera said gently. I was just passing through. She left soon after, walking slowly, letting the thoughts settle rather than rush it away. The image on the phone had been clear. The scarf was real. Caven's behavior had not changed back. Evidence did not disappear because one detail asked a question. Avera understood that doubt wasn't failure. It was responsibility. Critical thinking demanded it. But doubt also required context, and context had already been built carefully over time. She remembered something she had once learned. Isolated facts could mislead, but patterns rarely did. One missing detail did not erase consistency elsewhere. It simply reminded her to remain precise. That night, Caven asked casually, "Did you stop by the office today?" "Yes," she replied. He paused. "Everything okay?" Avera met his eyes. "I'm fine." And she was, because doubt had done its job. It had tested her certainty and found it still standing. After leaving the office that day, Avera didn't rush home. She walked instead, letting the city move around her while her thoughts arranged themselves with care. Doubt had done its work. What remained now was direction. That evening, Caven mentioned the banquet casually, as if it were another item on a familiar calendar. "It's formal," he said. "Mostly colleagues." "Solène will be there too." Avera nodded while setting the table. "You should go," she replied. "These things matter for work." He glanced at her, surprised by how easily she said it. "You don't mind?" "No," she said softly. "I don't." The plan formed not as revenge, but as structure. Public settings revealed private choices when people believed they were safe. Avera understood that environments didn't create behavior. They exposed it. The banquet wasn't a test. It was an opportunity for truth to appear without being forced. Earlier that afternoon, long before Caven mentioned the banquet, Avera had already been at the hotel. She wore neutral clothing, nothing that asked to be remembered. At the service entrance, no one questioned her. People rarely did when you moved with purpose. She nodded to a staff member passing by, returning the gesture easily. Inside the private suite, she worked, slowly. The camera was small, discreet, placed high enough to capture the room without invading it. She tested the angle once, adjusted it slightly, and stepped back. "This isn't about watching," she whispered to herself. "It's about knowing." There was no excitement in the act, no fear, just concentration. She made sure nothing was disturbed, nothing left behind. When she finished, the room looked untouched, waiting. Avera understood that observation, when done ethically and with restraint, wasn't intrusion. It was preparation. Knowledge gathered quietly allowed decisions to be made clearly, without exaggeration or denial. That night, Avera lay awake longer than usual, listening to Caven's breathing beside her. He slept easily, unaware of how carefully she had drawn her limits. She wasn't trying to humiliate him. She wasn't trying to ruin anything. Destruction was loud and reckless. Truth was quieter and far more lasting. If I'm wrong, she thought, this ends with me. And if she was right, it would end with honesty, not chaos. She understood something essential. Outcomes mattered less than integrity. When people sought answers out of anger, they often lost themselves in the process. Avera refused to do that. Whatever she discovered would be met with clarity, not cruelty. Caven stirred slightly. "You're still awake?" he murmured. "Yes," she said. "Just thinking." He reached for her hand, half asleep. She let him. If you've ever trusted your instincts even when it felt uncomfortable, stay with this story. Sometimes, intuition isn't suspicion. It's self-respect asking to be heard, and learning to listen to it can change everything about how you choose yourself. Avera arrived early, not to be seen but to see. She chose a seat at the edge of the room where movement passed naturally, where no one lingered long enough to ask questions. From there, the banquet unfolded in clean lines, tables set precisely, voices layered in polite conversation, glasses lifted and lowered with practiced ease. Kaivan entered with Solène beside him. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. Their closeness spoke in quieter ways. When she leaned in to speak, he angled his body toward her without thinking. When he laughed, it came easier, fuller than it had at home. Their steps matched as they moved through the room, neither adjusting for the other, as though alignment had already been agreed upon. "You look relaxed tonight," Solène said, her voice low. Kaivan smiled. "It's been a long week." Avera watched how his shoulders softened near her, how his attention stayed anchored even when others approached. Body language, she knew, revealed comfort before words ever did. People could say anything, but their bodies told the truth without realizing it. She didn't feel anger. She felt confirmation building quietly. Observation, when paired with patience, removed the need for assumptions. It replaced reaction with understanding, and understanding was what allowed her to remain steady as the evening continued. The waiter approached them quietly, as trained professionals did, moving with discretion rather than urgency. Avera noticed him first. She always did now. Awareness had sharpened her attention to small shifts. "Mr. Kaivan," the waiter said politely, extending a card between his fingers. "The hotel would like to offer you a private room as a courtesy this evening." Kaivan looked at the card, then at Solène. The pause lasted only a second, but it mattered. He didn't laugh it off. He didn't refuse. His eyes searched her face briefly, as if asking permission without words. Solène's lips curved slightly. "That's generous," she said. "You should accept." Kaivan exhaled and reached for the key. "Thank you," he told the waiter. That was all. No excuses were needed. No explanation offered. Consent had already been given in silence. Avera felt something settle inside her, not pain, not relief, but clarity. Decisions often revealed themselves in pauses. That brief hesitation held more truth than 100 conversations ever could. Behavioral science often noted that when people hesitated before agreeing, they were weighing consequence against desire. Kaivan had made his choice quickly once he realized it would not be challenged. The waiter left. The key disappeared into Kaivan's pocket. Nothing dramatic followed. And that was the point. Avera didn't wait to see what followed. Once the key disappeared into Kaivan's pocket, the evening had already said enough. She rose from her seat calmly, smoothing her dress as she stepped away from the table. No one noticed. People rarely did when a woman chose to exit quietly. As she passed the corridor leading toward the elevators, she heard Kaivan's voice behind her, distant but familiar. "I'll catch up with you," he said. To Solène, not to her. That distinction mattered. Outside, the night air felt steady against her skin. She paused near the entrance, allowing herself one measured breath before continuing on. Leaving early wasn't avoidance. It was discernment. Staying longer would not create new information. It would only demand endurance where none was required. She understood that clarity often arrived before confrontation. Educational research frequently emphasized that once a pattern was confirmed, continued exposure added stress without insight. Healthy decision-making involved recognizing when enough was enough. As she walked away from the hotel, Avera felt no urge to turn back. Observation had done its work. The truth was intact, undisturbed by reaction. And sometimes the most powerful response wasn't confrontation at all, but knowing precisely when to step away. Avera opened the footage later that night, long after the house had gone quiet. The screen filled with the private room she had already seen hours earlier, now occupied. Kaivan and Solène entered easily, like people who didn't need to orient themselves. He loosened his jacket without being asked. She took off her heels and placed them neatly by the wall. "You look tired," Solène said. He smiled. "Long day. I'm glad we came up here." They sat close, not touching, but aligned. Their conversation flowed without pauses, without caution. It sounded practiced, comfortable, shared. Avera noticed how little explanation passed between them. Familiarity, she knew, wasn't built in moments. It was built over time, through repeated access. Research often showed that emotional closeness formed long before physical lines were crossed. Watching them, she understood this wasn't new, it was ongoing. The conversation shifted without effort, moving away from work and into something more personal. Not confessions, not declarations, just familiarity deep enough to no longer need context. "I wasn't sure you'd accept the room," Solène said, her tone light. Caven shrugged. "I wanted somewhere quiet." That sentence stayed with Avera. Wanting mattered. Choice mattered. They sat facing each other now, knees angled inward, attention fully shared. Nothing forced, nothing rushed. The intention was clear not because of what they did, but because of what they allowed themselves to plan for. Avera had learned that intention revealed itself before action. Behavioral research often pointed out that people crossed boundaries mentally long before doing so physically. What she saw wasn't hesitation, it was readiness. The room wasn't a mistake. It was a decision made earlier and confirmed silently. What unsettled Avera most wasn't what they did, it was how settled they were. Caven leaned back on the sofa as though the room belonged to him. Solène sat beside him, her posture relaxed, her laughter easy. "This feels nice," she said quietly. He nodded. "It does." There was no urgency between them, no rush. Comfort like that didn't come from novelty. It came from familiarity that had already been practiced elsewhere. They spoke softly, sometimes not at all, sitting in shared silence that felt earned. That was the line Avera recognized. Intimacy wasn't always physical. Often, it was the ease with which people stopped guarding themselves. She closed the footage gently. There had been no physical betrayal, but something more damaging had occurred. Emotional safety had been relocated. Studies often showed that trust eroded not through dramatic acts, but through repeated comfort, given where it no longer belonged. After closing the footage, Avera sat for a long moment without moving. When she finally stood, it wasn't rushed. It was resolved. She pulled a small bag from the closet and placed it on the bed. The house was still. Caven hadn't returned yet. That mattered. Packing in silence allowed her to think clearly, without performance or explanation. She folded only what she needed. Simple clothes. A book. Her charger. The ring stayed on her finger. This wasn't abandonment. It was distance. As she zipped the bag, her phone lit up briefly with a message from Caven. Running late. She didn't respond. Education had taught her that clarity often required removing yourself from the environment where confusion was reinforced. Stepping away wasn't avoidance, it was regulation. By choosing quiet action over reactive words, Avera protected her judgment from being shaped by emotion. Packing this way wasn't dramatic, it was deliberate, and deliberateness was how self-respect first learned to breathe. Avera stood by the door with her bag resting at her feet. For a moment, she considered writing something. One sentence, maybe two, an explanation, a question, something that might soften the absence. She didn't. Words, she knew, would invite response. Response would invite negotiation, and negotiation would arrive before clarity had fully settled. She glanced once at the kitchen counter, where Caven usually dropped his keys. Empty. Her phone buzzed again. Still at the hotel. "I'll explain later." She typed, then erased. Silence felt more honest than anything she could send. Leaving without a note wasn't cruelty. It was boundary setting. Communication experts often emphasized that pauses created space for reflection, especially when emotions ran high. By not explaining herself prematurely, Avera allowed the reality of her absence to speak on its own terms. She turned the handle gently and stepped outside, closing the door behind her without locking it. Some messages didn't need to be written. They needed to be felt. Avera didn't go far. She chose a quiet place where no one knew her routine, where time felt slower and unclaimed. When she set her bag down, the relief surprised her. Not happiness, relief. Her phone rang that night. Avera? Caven's voice came tight, uncertain. Where are you? I'm safe, she said evenly. Why didn't you tell me you were leaving? I needed space before explanations, she replied. Not after. He was silent. Choosing space wasn't punishment. It was preservation. Studies on emotional regulation often showed that distance reduced reactive decisions and restored clarity. Avera wasn't trying to make Kaivan feel fear. She was giving herself room to think without influence. She sat by the window, breathing steadily, feeling grounded in her choice. Self-respect didn't require announcement. It required action aligned with values. And for the first time in weeks, her thoughts felt fully her own. Avera returned home 2 days later. The house felt familiar but altered, as though it had been waiting. Caven was in the living room when she walked in, standing instead of sitting, his posture uncertain. He didn't rush toward her. That restraint mattered. Where did you go? He asked quietly. I needed space, she replied, setting her bag down. For 2 days. His voice wasn't sharp. It was careful. Yes. They sat across from each other, the distance deliberate. Avera didn't raise her voice. She didn't list details. She didn't accuse. Calm, she had learned, disarmed defensiveness better than anger ever could. I know, she said simply. Caven looked up. Know what? She held his gaze. Enough. Silence followed, not empty but full. Caven exhaled slowly, rubbing his hands together. I was worried, he said. I know, Avera replied. That's why I waited. This wasn't a confrontation built on evidence. It was one built on readiness. Educational psychology often showed that difficult conversations landed best when both people were regulated, not reactive. Avera hadn't come to argue. She had come to listen, and listening required calm ground to stand on. Caven didn't speak immediately. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor as though the truth needed a softer landing before it could be lifted. I liked how it felt, he said at last. Being noticed. Avera didn't interrupt. At work I was competent, reliable. At home I was steady. But with her, he paused, searching for words. I felt interesting again. That wasn't accidental, Avera said calmly. He shook his head. No, it wasn't. He admitted how he had delayed shutting it down. How he told himself it wasn't serious because nothing physical had happened. How he chose explanations that made his behavior easier to live with. I avoided responsibility, he continued, because taking it meant admitting I'd crossed a line I promised I wouldn't. Avera listened, her expression unchanged. And I chose comfort, he added quietly. The comfort of not disrupting things, of letting it continue without deciding anything. Behavioral studies often showed that people didn't betray their values all at once. They compromised them gradually, one rationalization at a time. Caven's honesty wasn't dramatic, it was uncomfortable. And that was how Avera knew it was real. Avera let the silence stretch after Caven finished speaking. She didn't rush to respond. She didn't soften what he had said or harden herself against it. She absorbed it. I'm not listening so I can excuse this, she said finally. I'm listening so I can understand what I'm deciding about. Caven nodded slowly. I know. She asked questions then, not sharp ones, not emotional ones, practical ones. When he noticed the shift, when he realized he was avoiding honesty, what he told himself to keep going, each answer mattered. Avera understood that listening didn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it meant clarity. Research on conflict resolution often showed that understanding motives didn't erase consequences, but it did prevent confusion from guiding the next step. She needed truth without decoration, and for the first time, he was giving it to her. When the conversation ended, nothing was resolved. But something essential had changed. The truth had been spoken without interruption. If you were in this room, what would honesty look like for you right now? Not what sounds good, but what's real. Share your thoughts in the comments and stay with this story. The weeks that followed moved differently. Slower, intentional. Avera didn't return to the old rhythm right away. She stayed measured, keeping space between herself and Caven even when they shared the same room. Mornings were quiet, evenings shorter. "You don't have to decide anything yet," Caven said once, careful not to push. "I know," she replied. "That's why I'm taking my time." Distance, she learned, wasn't absence. It was recalibration. Studies on emotional recovery often showed that time allowed reactions to settle into insight. Avera wasn't delaying her choice. She was allowing clarity to arrive without pressure, and for the first time, patients felt protective rather than uncertain. Therapy began without ceremony. They sat side by side, not touching, listening more than speaking. The counselor asked questions that didn't accuse but clarified. "When did you stop saying what you needed?" she asked Caven. He hesitated. When it felt easier not to. Avera spoke less, but she paid attention to how accountability sounded when it wasn't rushed, to how discomfort often preceded honesty. Research often showed that guided reflection helped, separate intent from impact. Therapy wasn't repair yet, it was examination. And examination, Avera knew, was the first honest form of effort. Boundaries came next, not as punishment, but as structure. "I need transparency," Avera said one evening, "not reassurance." "Access," Caven nodded. "I understand." Phones stayed open. Schedules were shared. Conversations that once ended early were allowed to continue, even when they felt uncomfortable. Avera noticed how boundaries changed the tone of effort. What was once promised now had to be demonstrated. Behavioral research often emphasized that trust rebuilt only when expectations were clear and consistently respected. Avera wasn't creating rules to control him. She was defining conditions that allowed her to feel safe again, and safety, she knew, was not negotiable. Avera didn't announce her decision right away. She let it settle first, testing how it felt in silence. One evening, she spoke plainly. "I'm not leaving," she said, "but I'm not returning to what we were." Caven looked at her carefully. "What does that mean?" "It means this only continues if it's rebuilt," she replied, "not maintained." Rebuilt. Staying, she understood, wasn't the same as settling. Research often showed that remaining in a relationship after rupture required renegotiation, not nostalgia. Avera stayed because she chose possibility, not familiarity, and choice, made consciously, carried more strength than habit ever could. "I'm not forgiving this quickly," Avera said, meeting Caven's eyes. "And I'm not pretending it didn't change me." He nodded, slowly. "I wouldn't expect you to." Forgiveness to her wasn't an apology accepted on trust. It was something earned through consistency. She refused to skip the work simply to restore comfort. Research on relational repair often emphasized that rushed forgiveness increased resentment, while delayed forgiveness protected emotional clarity. Avera chose awareness over relief. She allowed herself to remember, to question, to pause. Not because she wanted to punish him, but because forgetting too soon would mean betraying herself, and that was a line she would no longer cross. "What I'm giving you isn't forgiveness," Avera said quietly. "It's an opportunity." Caven swallowed. "I won't waste it." "That's not something you say once," she replied. "It's something you show over time." Opportunity, she understood, was conditional. It required effort that didn't fade when attention returned elsewhere. Relationship studies often noted that real change revealed itself through sustained behavior, not declarations made under pressure. Avera wasn't offering certainty. She was allowing space for proof. And in doing so, she protected herself from expectation while leaving room for growth. Staying this time was not an act of hope alone, but of discernment. Years later, the house felt different, not because it had changed, but because the people inside it had. Avera stood by the window one quiet afternoon, watching light settle gently across the room. Caven was nearby, reading, comfortable in a way that no longer felt careless. "Do you ever think about that time?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she replied, "but it doesn't hurt the way it used to." Time, she had learned, didn't repair anything on its own. What healed was what people did with time, how they showed up repeatedly, honestly. Growth wasn't dramatic. It was cumulative, and distance, once chosen wisely, had taught her the value of staying present with herself first. Avera no longer rushed her instincts. She listened to them the way one listened to a trusted friend, without fear, without dismissal. "I used to think strength meant holding things together," she said once, almost to herself. Caven looked up. "And now I know it means knowing when to pause." Wisdom, she discovered, wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself with certainty. It showed up as awareness, as patience, as the ability to sit with discomfort long enough to understand it. Studies often showed that emotional maturity grew from reflection, not reaction. Avera carried that knowledge quietly, allowing it to guide her decisions without needing validation from anyone else. When people asked Avera how she had known what to do, she never offered a complicated answer. "I listened," she would say, "and I didn't rush myself." Listening, she learned, wasn't about suspicion. It was about self-trust, the quiet voice that noticed patterns, that asked for clarity without demanding drama, had never been wrong. She had simply learned to respect it. If this story reminded you of the importance of trusting your own inner voice, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Midnight Story Vault. Stories like this are meant to be carried forward, quietly, thoughtfully, and with care.